You believe your thoughts belong to you. You believe your choices are your own. You believe your habits are decisions you made freely. But what if none of that is true? What if your daily behavior is not controlled by your goals, not controlled by your dreams, not even controlled by your effort? What if it is controlled by a silent program that was placed inside your mind long before you were old enough to question it? Look at your life honestly. You wake up at the same time. You scroll the same apps. You feel the same stress. You delay the same goals. You repeat the same promises to yourself. You carry the same worries into every week, different days, same patterns. That is not coincidence. That is programming. Somewhere in your early life, before your brain had filters, your mind learned what normal feels like. It learned what success looks like. It learned what effort means. It learned how much you think you deserve. It learned what kind of life feels safe. And once the mind learns what feels safe, it fights anything that tries to change it. So every time you try to grow, your mind creates excuses. When you try to improve, your mind creates doubt. When you try to stay consistent, your mind creates tiredness. When you try to rise, your mind creates fear. Not because you are weak, but because your mind is protecting an old identity. You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are not undisciplined. You are conditioned. Your mind learned rules you never chose. How much money feels realistic. How confident you are allowed to feel. How long you are supposed to stay small. How much effort feels uncomfortable. How much success feels threatening. And now, your mind enforces those rules every day without asking your permission. That is why motivation fades. That is why habits collapse. That is why you start strong and slowly return to the same level. Your mind is not trying to help your future. It is trying to protect your past. It protects what it already knows. It protects what feels familiar. Even if that familiar life makes you tired, even if it makes you frustrated, even if it makes you disappointed in yourself, your mind would rather keep you stuck in what feels known than risk you stepping into what feels unknown. And here is the dangerous part. The longer you stay inside an old identity, the more your mind begins to treat it as who you are, not who you were, not what you learned, but who you are. And once a belief becomes who I am, your mind will defend it like survival depends on it. That is why change feels hard, not because the actions are difficult, but because your mind thinks the new version of you is a threat. So it whispers, start tomorrow. Rest today. You're tired. You deserve a break. It won't matter anyway. You've tried before. Those thoughts are not accidents. They are not random. They are protective mechanisms. Your mind is not asking, what will make my life better? It is asking, what keeps my identity safe? And if your identity is built around being average, being cautious, being quiet, being unsure, being delayed, your mind will block anything that challenges that, which means the real battle is not habits, not discipline, not effort. The real battle is identity control, because the version of you that you think is you is often a program you inherited. You did not design it. You did not choose it, but you are living inside it. And until you become aware of that program, you will keep thinking your mind is on your side. It is not. It is loyal to your past, not your future. Your mind did not grow wild. It was trained. Every belief you now treat as reality was once a sentence you heard, a reaction you absorbed, a pattern you watched, or a consequence you experienced when you were too young to question it. You were not born afraid of failing. You were not born doubting your value. You were not born believing life must be hard. You learned those things. Your nervous system watched how adults reacted to money. It watched how they reacted to stress. It watched how they spoke about opportunity, risk, effort, and success. And without asking you, your mind recorded those emotional reactions as truth, not logical truth, survival truth. If the people around you were anxious about money, your mind learned that money equals danger. If effort was followed by criticism, your mind learned that trying is unsafe. If confidence was punished, your mind learned that standing out is risky. If rest was followed by guilt, your mind learned that peace must be earned. These reactions did not stay as memories. They became internal rules, rules your mind enforces every day. So now, years later, when you think you are making choices, you are often just obeying invisible rules that were installed in you long ago. That is why you can logically know what to do and still not do it. That is why your intentions feel sincere and still fail to turn into consistency. Your logic lives in the front of your brain, but your behavior is controlled by the emotional rules stored deeper. Your conscious mind says, this will improve my life. Your deeper mind asks, will this make me unsafe? And safety always wins, not because you are weak, but because your mind was built to protect, not to grow. This is why so many people stay trapped in cycles they hate. They want change. They imagine change. They even plan change. But the moment the body senses unfamiliar effort, unfamiliar attention, unfamiliar pressure, unfamiliar responsibility, the mind fires a warning. Fatigue appears, doubt appears, procrastination appears, distraction appears, not as enemies, but as guardians of the old self. And here is the part most people never realize. Your mind will use your own voice to stop you. It does not shout. It whispers. It says, later, you deserve rest. You'll start Monday. You're busy. You're already doing enough. This is unrealistic. People like you don't usually get that. And because it sounds like your thoughts, you believe it is you. But it is not you. It is your conditioning speaking through your voice, which means many of the thoughts you think are actually echoes of past environments, past fears, past limitations, and past identities. You are not thinking freely. You are thinking predictably. Your mind is running a script. And if you do not interrupt the script, your future will look like your past, even if you desperately want it to change, because desire does not override programming. Awareness does. Once you see the pattern, you can no longer pretend you are simply lazy or unmotivated. You are fighting a trained system. The world around you is not neutral. It does not simply exist. It trains. From the moment you step into school, work, media, and routine life, your mind is constantly receiving subtle instructions about what kind of person you are expected to be. Not spoken instructions, behavioral instructions, how fast you should move, how much you should question, how ambitious you are allowed to be, how much you should settle, how loud your dreams should sound. These rules are rarely said out loud. They are enforced through reactions. When you aim small, you are called realistic. When you aim big, you are called naive. When you play safe, you are praised. When you take risks, you are warned. When you blend in, you are accepted. When you stand out, you are questioned. And slowly, invisibly, your mind begins to shrink its vision, not because you decided to, but because safety feels better than resistance. So your goals become smaller, your confidence becomes quieter, your plans become safer, your identity becomes narrower, not because you lack ability, but because your mind learned that belonging feels safer than expansion. And here is where most people get trapped for life. They confuse comfort with truth. They think the life they are currently living is the life they are meant to live. They think the limits they feel are real limits. They think their doubts are accurate warnings. But those feelings are not truth. They are training. You were trained to feel nervous about growth. You were trained to feel uncertain about change. You were trained to feel suspicious of your own ambition, which means your emotional reactions are not objective reality. They are learned filters. So when your mind says this feels risky, it is not measuring real danger. It is measuring unfamiliarity, and unfamiliarity always feels unsafe to a conditioned mind. That is why most people never outgrow their environment, even when they move to new places, new jobs, new relationships. They bring the old identity with them. Same fears, same self-talk, same habits, different location, because freedom is not external, it is internal. And until the internal identity changes, nothing else truly changes. This is why sudden success destroys people, why lottery winners lose money, why athletes burn out, why opportunities collapse. Not because success is dangerous, but because the mind is still loyal to an old identity that does not know how to hold the new life. So the mind unconsciously self-sabotages to restore emotional normal, which means if your identity does not expand, your life cannot expand either, not permanently. Inside your mind lives a silent set point. It is the emotional temperature your nervous system believes is normal. How much pressure feels acceptable. How much success feels comfortable. How much responsibility feels tolerable. How much confidence feels natural. This emotional set point was formed early, and it now governs your behavior more powerfully than your goals ever could. When your life rises above that set point, your mind reacts, not with celebration, with correction, because to your nervous system, unfamiliar success feels the same as danger. Your heart speeds up, your breathing changes, your thoughts get loud, your body feels tension. So your mind creates behaviors to bring you back down to normal. You procrastinate, you skip habits, you doubt yourself, you lose focus, you get tired, you get distracted, not because you are failing, but because your nervous system is trying to restore its old emotional temperature. That is why you can feel uncomfortable even when life is improving. That is why progress sometimes feels heavier than struggle. That is why your best opportunities often arrive with anxiety instead of excitement. Your mind is not reacting to reality. It is reacting to unfamiliar identity. And until that set point changes, you will unconsciously sabotage anything that rises too far above your old self, which means you do not rise to your goals. You fall to your identity every time. So the question is not, what do I want? The real question is, who does my nervous system believe I am? Because your body will always obey the second question more than the first. And this is why willpower alone fails. Willpower tries to push behavior upward, while your nervous system pulls identity downward. So you feel stuck in cycles, strong start, slow fade, reset to old patterns, not because you are inconsistent, but because your set point is unchanged. Now here is the dangerous illusion. Most people think discipline fixes this. It does not. Discipline only creates temporary pressure. It does not reprogram the emotional thermostat, which means without changing the internal set point, effort becomes exhausting, habits feel forced, and success feels unstable. You are trying to live a new life with an old nervous system, and it fights you every day. But here is the turning point. Your nervous system is not permanent. Your identity is not fixed. Your internal set point can be reset. And once it changes, consistency becomes natural. Confidence becomes automatic. Growth becomes normal. The first rule of reprogramming your internal set point is simple, but it feels unsettling. You must stop identifying with your thoughts. Right now, most of your inner dialogue feels like you. It feels personal. It feels accurate. It feels trustworthy. But those thoughts are not you. They are reflexes. They are habits. They are conditioned responses. And as long as you treat them as your identity, they will continue to control your behavior. Every time your mind says, I'm tired, pause, ask, is this tiredness or is this resistance? Every time your mind says, I'll do it later, pause, ask, is this logic or is this protection? Every time your mind says, this is uncomfortable, pause, ask, is this danger or is this unfamiliarity? This pause creates a crack in the old program because the old identity survives on automatic reactions. The moment you bring conscious attention into the process, the program weakens. You are no longer obeying the script blindly. You are watching it. And once you are watching it, you are no longer it. This is where power begins. Not in motivation, not in affirmations, not in hype. Power begins in separation. You are not your fear. You are not your doubt. You are not your hesitation. You are not your fatigue. You are the awareness watching those signals arise. And awareness creates choice. Once you see the old reactions as patterns rather than truths, your nervous system begins to loosen its grip. You stop panicking when growth feels uncomfortable. You stop mistaking anxiety for danger. You stop treating resistance as a sign to quit. And slowly, quietly, your internal set point begins to shift, not by force, but by familiarity. Because every time you act through discomfort, instead of retreating from it, your nervous system learns this level is safe. And safety is what rewires identity. Not words, not goals, not promises, experience. Your body does not believe what you say. It believes what you repeatedly survive. And the more often you survive new levels of responsibility, visibility, discipline, effort, and consistency, the more your internal thermostat rises, which means habits stop feeling heavy, which means progress stops feeling threatening, which means growth starts feeling normal. And this is where most people fail, because they wait to feel ready. But readiness is not a feeling. It is a result of exposure. You do not feel safe before you grow. You feel safe because you grow. Your identity does not change in one dramatic moment. It changes in quiet repetitions. Your nervous system learns safety through exposure, not through intention, which means you do not reprogram your mind by thinking differently. You reprogram it by living differently in small, controlled ways that your body can survive without panic. This is why massive plans often collapse. They trigger your old identity too violently. Your nervous system reads them as danger, so it pushes back. But small actions slip under the alarm. They feel harmless. They feel manageable. They feel safe enough to repeat. And repetition is what rewrites the internal set point. So instead of asking, what big change should I make? Ask, what small behavior would my future identity consider normal? Then begin there. If your future self wakes up early, begin with 5 minutes earlier, not an hour. If your future self eats better, begin with one meal, not a new diet. If your future self works consistently, begin with 10 minutes, not a full routine. If your future self speaks confidently, begin with one honest sentence, not a speech. These are not tiny habits. They are identity exposures. Every time you complete one, your nervous system records, this is safe. This is normal. This is who I am now. And your internal thermostat shifts upward, slowly, quietly, permanently, which means you are not forcing change. You are normalizing it. And once a behavior feels normal, discipline is no longer needed. It happens automatically. That is the real goal, not to fight your mind, but to retrain what your mind considers normal. And here's the part that will change how you see yourself forever. You do not become disciplined. You become someone for whom discipline feels natural. You do not become confident. You become someone for whom confidence feels familiar. You do not become successful. You become someone for whom success feels safe. That is the difference. And this is why most people chase motivation, while others quietly rewire identity. Your self-image is the silent blueprint your life follows. It is not what you say about yourself. It is what your nervous system expects from you. If your self-image sees you as someone who struggles, your mind will create struggle. If your self-image sees you as someone who delays, your mind will create delay. If your self-image sees you as someone who quits, your mind will create reasons to quit, not because you want to fail, but because your mind always tries to stay consistent with who it thinks you are. Consistency feels safe. Change feels uncertain. So your mind quietly edits your behavior to match your identity. This is why two people can use the same plan, the same tools, the same resources, and get completely different results. Not because one is smarter, but because one's identity is wired to support success, while the other's is wired to defend limitation. Your mind will never outperform your self-image. So if you want your life to rise, your self-image must rise first. But here's the trap. Most people try to think positively. They repeat affirmations. They hype themselves. They imagine success. But their nervous system still feels unsafe at higher levels, which means their body does not believe the words, and behavior does not change. So the key is not to convince your mind. The key is to prove safety to your nervous system. And the way you do that is through evidence, not imagined evidence, real evidence. Every small action you complete becomes proof. I am someone who keeps promises. I am someone who follows through. I am someone who improves. I am someone who shows up. And proof is what upgrades self-image. Your self-image does not change because you say new words. It changes because you show your nervous system new patterns. So if you want to change your identity, you must build a trail of evidence, small wins, simple habits, quiet consistency, not dramatic moments, but repeated survival at higher levels of responsibility. This is why transformation feels boring at first. No fireworks, no sudden breakthroughs, just quiet upgrades. But those upgrades are permanent. They do not fade. They do not collapse. They do not need motivation. They become who you are. The most dangerous belief you carry is not fear. It is not doubt. It is not even laziness. It is the belief that you are already yourself, that the person you are today is the person you are, that your limits are real, that your patterns are permanent, that your personality is fixed. Because the moment your mind labels your current behavior as me, change feels like betrayal. So every attempt to grow creates internal resistance, not because growth is wrong, but because your mind thinks it threatens your identity, which means your mind will defend your old version even when your old version is hurting you. This is why people say, I've always been like this. That's just who I am. I'm not disciplined. I'm not confident. I'm not consistent. Those are not observations. They are identity contracts. And once your mind signs those contracts, it enforces them. But here is the truth. You are not a personality. You are not a set of habits. You are not a history. You are a pattern in motion, which means everything you think is you is simply a repeated behavior that has become familiar. And familiarity feels like identity. But identity is not fixed. It is trained. And the moment you understand that, your limits begin to dissolve. You stop asking, who am I? You start asking, what pattern am I repeating? And patterns can be changed, which means your future is not about becoming someone new. It is about repeating new behaviors until they feel like you. And this is where freedom truly begins, because your life does not change by chasing dreams. It changes by upgrading your patterns. Your future version of you already exists, not as a person, but as a pattern. There is a version of you who wakes up earlier without effort, a version of you who moves with confidence, a version of you who follows through, a version of you who does not debate with hesitation, a version of you who feels calm at higher levels of responsibility. That version is not created by hope. It is created by repetition. So the question becomes, what does your future self do without thinking? Those behaviors are the blueprint. Your job is not to force motivation. Your job is to begin rehearsing those behaviors at a small scale until they feel familiar. This is how you install a new identity, not by hype, not by promises, but by repetition that feels safe enough to repeat. And once your nervous system accepts those behaviors as normal, your mind stops resisting them. They happen automatically. This is why real growth feels quiet, because it is not emotional. It is neurological. You are not becoming powerful by feeling powerful. You are becoming powerful by repeating power. And the moment those repetitions cross the threshold of familiarity, your identity upgrades without effort, which means the war is already over. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not late. You are simply living inside an old pattern, and patterns can be rewritten. The moment you truly understand this, pressure disappears because you no longer feel like you are fighting yourself. You realize you are not trying to change your life. You are simply retraining what your nervous system considers normal, which means your future does not depend on willpower. It depends on familiarity. You do not need to become a new person. You need to make new behaviors familiar. And familiarity is built through repetition that feels safe enough to continue. This is the missing key. Most people burn out because they try to jump identities. They try to live like a future version of themselves without teaching their nervous system that this new life is safe. So their body panics, their mind resists, their habits collapse, not because they failed, but because their identity was never updated. Now you know better. You understand that your mind is not the enemy. It is simply loyal to what it knows. So instead of fighting it, you train it. You move in small exposures. You normalize higher levels of responsibility. You normalize consistency. You normalize confidence. You normalize follow-through. And every small repetition rewrites your self-image quietly, permanently. So you stop asking, how do I stay motivated? You start asking, what would my future self do automatically? Then you rehearse that behavior today at a scale your nervous system can accept. And that is how your life upgrades without pressure, not through force, not through hype, not through emotional spikes, through identity alignment, because your mind is not yours in the way you thought. It is programmable, and now you finally hold the controls. You are no longer waiting for change. You are installing it.